So here's the corny joke to start with. First of all, tonight's lesson is the Ilay Nishmas Yitzchak Tzvi Ben Yosef, his neshama should have an elevation. There was this blind guy sitting on the park bench. He's just, minding his own business. Along comes some guy next to him. It was Chol Hamod Pesach, Passover. You go out to the park on Pesach. When you go to the park, Jews never go without food, of course, right? So he comes with food and he's eating. And a blind guy sitting next to him. So he says, "What's that?" So it's a matzah. He wants some matzah. He gives the blind guy some matzah. So the blind guy sitting there, he's fielding the matzah, and rubbing the matzah in his hands. And finally, after a few minutes, he turns back to the religious Jew sitting next to him on the park bench and says, "Who in the world wrote this stuff?" Yeah, you guys like it. Okay, good.
That's a good joke.
It's good?
Yeah, I like it.
Okay. The ladies like it. Okay, if you like it, I'm glad I said it. So let's get serious tonight because we have a very serious topic to talk about, which is the matzah that we eat. And we know that we are obsessed with eating Shmurah matzah, specifically Shmurah matzah. This is the food that we eat. There's a major emphasis and focus in the Chabad community on making it every single Jew has matzah to eat. And in fact, this is the matzah that our forefathers ate when they left Egypt. And the Rebbe pushed very, very strongly that we should do everything we can and spend any money we can to put in effort and time and resources to making sure that every single Jew has Shmurah matzah, not matzah. You can go to Publix and buy Yehuda matzah for $4, $5, whatever it costs. You can have a machine, no more. Out of that, I don't buy everything with that. But you can buy machine made matzah and you can eat machine matzah on Pesach. It's kosher for Pesach, but to fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah, when we sit by our Seder, we make a blessing. Baruch Ata Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu. You commanded us and sanctified us with the mitzvah of eating matzah. That blessing should be said. That mitzvah should be fulfilled with authentic, handmade Shmurah matzah, not made through any machines, made with a personal effort, etc., etc., etc. So, in fact, tomorrow, right here at Chabad, we're going to be packaging hopefully 1,000 matzah boxes. We're having issues. The boxes got stuck in customs. I don't have, whatever. One of the many issues. Boxes. Yeah, but so tomorrow we're going to be packing 1,000 matzahs. And just to clarify, it's expensive to get 1,000 Shmurah matzahs, and we printed guides to go with every single one. It costs like $2 a guide, and it's a lot of money that me and Rabbi Freeman are splitting. Why? When you give, you get. That's true. God always takes care of us, and I don't regret ever giving. But why do we spend so much money and so much effort and so much work to be able to share the mitzvah matzah? That's what we're going to discuss tonight. Can't get away just yet. So let's start from the beginning. Why do we eat Shmurah matzah? Why do we eat matzah on Pesach? So for those that are watching online, for some reason Dropbox is not opening, but those who are sitting in the room have in front of you a photocopy, not a photocopy, a text that I made from the Haggadah, right? This is the Haggadah that we read as we are sitting at our Seder tables. We're sitting with our family, with our children, and we pick up the matzah. This is one of the most important paragraphs, actually, of the Haggadah. And we read as follows. Matzah zu sha'anu orchlim. This matzah is what we declare on the Seder night, as we're holding the matzah in our hand, several minutes after the manashtan and all that, several minutes before we eat the matzah. And we say, this matzah that we're eating, why are we eating it? Al-Shum, what's the reason why we're eating this matzah? And we answer, Al-Shum, because the dough of our forefathers did not have a chance to rise. Ad shenigla aleya melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu, until God, the King of all kings, the Holy One, blessed be He Himself, came and redeemed the Jewish people and took us out of Egypt. As it says that they baked the matzah, so they took out of Egypt. Uges matzahs kibel chametz. Actually, I quoted the verse, forgetting that it's actually quoted in the Haggadah. The verse in chapter 12, verse 39 says, they baked the dough that they had taken out of Egypt as unleavened cakes, as matzah. Why were they baking matzah unleavened cakes? Because the dough, as the verse said, kiloi chametz. The dough did not have a chance to rise. Why not? Because they had been driven out of Egypt and they could not waste any time. And therefore, because they were rushing so quickly, the dough didn't have a chance to rise, so they ate matzah. Right? You guys remember that story? What are you shaking your head at me for?
But we established in class that they didn't leave to the next morning. They had plenty of time.
Oh, so Robert is asking a question. One of the 4 questions. Robert's my wise son sitting at the Seder table. So Robert asks a good question. Now, what are you talking about? There's actually a whole number of questions. But one of the questions you can ask, why are we making up this myth that the reason why the dough didn't have a chance to rise is because they were rushing out of Egypt? They weren't rushed. When did they leave Egypt? Only after the sun came up. When did God reveal himself to the Jewish people and do the plague of the firstborn? And Pharaoh, we know the song, right? Pharaoh's running around in his pajamas in the middle of the night, trying to find Moshe and begging. The Egyptians are pushing and pressuring the Jews, get out of here, go, go, go. And the Jews say, what does Moshe say? We're not going to leave in the middle of the night like thieves. You're correct. We did learn that because it's actually true. We're going to go properly in the day, like the Etzem Hayei Mazeh we left. In the middle of the day, we left Egypt, not sneaking out in the middle of the night. So, like mentioned, correct. So why are we saying that the dough didn't have a chance to rest because we rushed out? It took many, many hours from when we were told to leave Egypt until we actually left Egypt. It was many, many hours. And by the way, to make your question stronger, how long does it take for dough to become chametz? That's correct. Once you mix if you're into a matzah bakery, you know that from when you mix the water and the flour together, you have 18 minutes until the water makes the dough become fermented, become leavened, and become chametz. I mean, matzah is also water and flour, just to clarify. But it gets completely baked before it has a chance to rise, meaning within the 18-minute time frame. So it was many, many hours from when the Jewish people were told they're going to leave Egypt until they left Egypt. So why are we sitting by the Seder at night? We pick up our matzah. We say the dough didn't have a chance to rise. We didn't have a chance to rise. It was from midnight till the sun came up, and then they traveled. They all gathered in Pisoim. Then they all traveled from there to Sukkot. It took time. It takes time. You know, there's 600,000 men, there's 3 million Jews, 4 Jews. Okay, I have kids in the heart, getting 8 kids in the car. It's more than 18 minutes, you know what I'm saying? Dough rises fast. I can get my kids to school in the morning. And here we're talking about the whole Jewish people. It wasn't time for the dough to rise. Okay, so that's question number 1. Question 2, and it's a similar kind of question, is the Jews didn't know they're leaving Egypt that night? Of course they knew that they were leaving Egypt that night. God revealed himself to Moses on Rosh Chodesh, the first day of the month of Nisan. And he says to Moshe, first of all, they already knew for several months, but they were clearly told 2 weeks of advance notice. Prepare the Korban Pesach, the Paschal lamb, and put the blood on your doorpost. And on the night of the Seder, after you have the matzah and the Seder, God's going to come and kill all the Egyptian firstborns, and you're going to experience the open, revealed hand of God, and you're going to leave Egypt. They knew this was coming. This was no surprise. Oh, boy, we got to get out of here quick. Find some dough. No time to rise. They knew what was going on, right? When you go traveling, and the Jewish mother doesn't pack a whole suitcase full of food to go on a journey, you're patting Kim on the hand. It's not how much food you have on the plane went to Israel, right? We end up with a whole suitcase full of food. We don't just go empty-handed. God forbid we would get hungry. We eat before we get hungry in case we would get hungry. So what do you mean? Like, I'm just trying to understand the storyline here. The Jewish people have a minimum of 2 weeks advance notice that they're leaving Egypt after the plague of the firstborn. They prepare for a Seder. And by the way, the mitzvah to eat matzah was already on the night when they were still in Egypt. In fact, earlier on in the Seder night, when we break the matzah, right, we also talk about the matzah. And then we talk about the poor man's bread. The poor man's bread that we ate in Egypt. We say, why are we eating the matzah? This is the poor man's bread. And our forefathers, we don't say why we're eating it, but we say this is the poor man's bread that our forefathers ate in Egypt. So the Jews were eating matzah on Pesach, the night of the Seder before the death of the firstborn. And then God appears and reveals himself and kills all the Egyptian firstborns. And they have a whole night, a whole day, to get ready to prepare food that they didn't prepare for the last 2 weeks. And yet we're saying that the reason why we eat matzah is not because our forefathers had a Seder and they ate matzah before God freed them. That's not what we're saying. Even though that would be true and that would be correct. We don't say that. We're saying the reason why we eat matzah is because after their Seder and after God revealed himself and killed all the Egyptian firstborns and did one of the greatest miracles ever, then we were so rushed, the dough did not have a chance to rise. So we got to understand that, right? We definitely need to understand this story of the Haggadah.
But why matzah?
I don't understand. What do you mean, why matzah? That's what they ate.
Why symbolize Yetziat Mitzrayim with the matzah?
Because that's what they ate. The Torah tells us clearly when the Jews left Egypt, they ate matzah. That's what they ate. So we remember what they ate when they left Egypt. That's how we remember the story. But the question is, why was it matzah? Why was it not a good fluffy bagel? Why did the dough not have time to rise? Matzah stays forever. That's true. Okay. So, okay. Let's go further because there's a lot I want to discuss. So the Jews, if you pay attention to what the verse actually says, and there's many answers to this question, by the way, meaning that all the commentaries struggle with this question. What do you mean the dough didn't have a chance to rise? So the classic answer is that the dough didn't have a chance to rise because they put the dough on their backs. This is the classic answer, just to give context. Dough only becomes chametz when you leave it alone. If you ever made challah, right? When you make the dough, what do? You give it a little to rise. If you're going to touch it and push it and play with it, it's not going to rise properly. So since the dough of the matzah was holy to them, they actually says that they carried it out on their shoulders. So when you're walking and the dough is bouncing around on your shoulders, the dough couldn't rise because they were rushing so much to get out of Egypt. The dough didn't rise. That's a classic answer given. You don't love it? That's okay. I have a much better answer to explain to you. Another answer is that they ate leftovers from the night before. They didn't prepare extra food. They were eating the leftover matzah from the Pesach Seder because they didn't have a chance to make fresh food. They just took leftovers. Every Seder has leftovers.
Wait,
have you ever been to Seder on leftovers? Of course not.
Wait. They had a Seder before they left Egypt?
Of course. The answer, let me repeat the question. Did they have a Seder before they left Egypt? By the way, you're right, Faith, 18 minutes. Boker Tov from Australia. Did they have a Seder? Absolutely. God told them to slaughter the Paschal lamb and to sit down and to eat the Paschal lamb with matzah and maror before the death of the firstborn, inside their houses with the blood on their doorposts. Absolutely. That was the original Seder, but that's not the Seder that we are commemorating when we eat matzah. Let me be very clear about this in case I wasn't. The Jews ate matzah. The first Seder in history took place while the Jews were still slaves. Technically, anyway, we were still slaves. We were still in Egypt, still under Egyptian control. That Seder happened on the night of the 15th before midnight. In fact, they had to finish eating their Seder by midnight, which is why till tonight, till this year, we have a mitzvah to eat Afikoma before the middle of the night. So they had to eat their Karban Pesach and their matzah and their maror in their homes, quarantined behind those doors with the blood on it. And then after they ate their matzah and their maror and all that, then God came and killed the Egyptian firstborn. And that's when there was this tremendous outcry in the land of Egypt. In every single Egyptian household, there were dead people. And they came running after the Jews, please leave right away. That's when they were borrowing all the wealth from Egypt. And then they left the next day, on the day of the 15th. In Chassidus, it explains that the dough didn't rise, not because the Jews did something to prevent it from rising, but because God had revealed himself. There had been such a tremendous divine revelation at that moment that the dough itself was not able to become leavened. If you look carefully at the verse, chapter 12, verse 39, what does the verse say? They took the dough that they took out of Egypt and they baked it into matzah. What did the next word say? Kilo chametz. Kilo chametz, which means for it was not chametz. The dough, the physical entity of the bread, of the dough, was physically unable to rise. Why not? Because God, not because it was gluten-free, not because the Jews were gluten-free pre-Exodus, but because God had revealed himself at that moment. And when God revealed himself at the moment of midnight, at the moment, as we say in the Haggadah, when Nikla Aleihem, Melech Malchei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that the King of all kings, the Holy One, blessed be He, revealed himself to the Jewish people at that moment at midnight, at that moment, the physical property of the dough the Jews had became infused with a tremendous divine energy, a tremendous holiness that prevented the dough from becoming chametz. And therefore, they made dough, they knew they were going to leave Egypt. And they prepared dough that they were going to make to leave Egypt. And the dough that they had prepared already to be the provision for them on their journey out of Egypt, the dough itself was not able to rise. The dough was not able to rise. Meaning, the dough had become holy dough. The dough had become infused with this divine energy. And this is the idea explained at great length in Chassidus. It's a beautiful idea. The matzah before midnight versus the matzah after midnight. In the very, very last Maimon, the last discourse the Rebbe ever spoke to us Chassidim, he talked about this idea of the pre-midnight matzah versus the post-midnight matzah. But the point is, I'm giving you the point because I still want to talk about the faith of the matzah. I'm going to explain in a second. The point is, the physical dough had become divinely infused. They have like vitamin infused. It was divinely infused. The physical dough was not able to become chametz.
This is before midnight.
No, it's after midnight. The dough before midnight had to be guarded. God clearly told the Jewish people to be careful to make dough that wouldn't become chametz and to make matzah. Okay? After midnight, the dough was not, there was no mitzvah. The first year the Jews left Egypt, there was no mitzvah to eat matzah for 7 days. The mitzvah was only to eat matzah on the first night of Pesach. They were allowed to eat chametz the rest of the 7 days. The 7-day holiday didn't exist. They had only been commanded about a seder on the night of Pesach. The next morning, they wanted to make fresh bread. It was matzah. The dough after midnight could not rise. In fact, when the Torah talks about the matzah before midnight, the word matzah is written without the letter vav. Mem tzadik taf. When the verse talks about the matzahs that they took, like in verse number 12, that we have, the verse 39 we have in front of us, where it says they took out the matzahs that they baked, you look on the second line of the Hebrew, ugos matzos, the matzah is spelled with the letter vav. The word is spelled differently when describing the matzah before midnight and describing the matzah after midnight. Because before midnight, there was no vav. A vav in Kabbalah represents a flow of divine energy. So before midnight, there was no flow of divine energy. After midnight, there was a flow of divine energy, and therefore it was a whole different kind of matzah. Okay. So, this in short is a Hasidic understanding of why when we sit by that seder, we say that the dough didn't have a chance to rise, not because the Jews stopped it from rising, but because it was unable to rise. Which explains the unique property of matzah. The Zohar in Kabbalah very famously tells us that matzah is called bread of faith. In Aramaic, it's called michla de mehem nusa, which means the bread of faith. Or in Hebrew, lechem shel emunah, bread of faith. So I looked up the Zohar today, wanted to find it. Actually, there's more than one source we have to give it. Here's the main source. It's from the Zohar, volume 2, page 183, side B. I don't know of an English translation to the Zohar online, but here's the Aramaic, the original source. And basically it's describing why we're allowed to eat matzah and chametz, etc. And it gives an example of a king that had an only son, a prince. I'm going to paraphrase from the Aramaic. I could read it, but you don't, whatever. You'll trust me that I'm saying it to you accurately. So the king had an only son that got sick. And they came with a medicine for the son. The only food that would be good for the son to eat, but the son was craving other food. So they took all the other foods out of the house. So the only food that he'd be able to eat would be this food that would heal the son. And until he was able to eat only that food. He got better, and then the doctors allowed the king to bring other foods back into the house. So too, the Jewish people, when the so too similarly, when the Jewish people left Egypt, we did not know the foundational, important secrets of believing in God. We were lacking in our understanding of belief in God. So the Holy One, blessed, he said, I have a medicine for the Jewish people. Let them taste this medicine. What's the medicine? The matzah. Until they'll eat this medicine, the matzah, they should not see any other breads. Because they'll see other bread, they won't eat the matzah, they'll eat the other breads. And therefore, God says you can't have the chametz in the house. Since they ate that matzah, which was their medicine, the male or the minda, then they were elevated to understand and to know the secrets, the mehem nusa of believing in God. And God says, now that I saw that they ate the matzah, they were cured, and they have faith in God, now you can bring the other bread into the house, and now they're allowed to eat chametz again after Pesach. That's the statement in the Zohar. From here, what do we see clearly in the Zohar? Zohar is telling us that for a Jew to eat matzah, Shmurah matzah, it's a medicine for his soul. So the Zohar is telling us, it's a medicine for his soul to allow him to have an understanding of faith in God. The Jewish people, when we left Egypt, says the Zohar, says God, so the Zohar is quoting God. They were sick spiritually. We were lacking in what does it mean to have a knowledge in the secret of believing in God. We ate the medicine, then we were healed, and then we were able to have other foods again. So, what does that mean for us? What does it mean to believe in God? We say to have emunah. We talk about having belief in God, trust in God. What does that mean? To believe that God created the universe? That's emunah, that's belief in God, to believe that God is the one who made the heavens and the earth? More than that. You don't need to be a big believer. I think 90-something% of Americans believe that God created the universe. Something like that. I don't know the exact number. It's a very high number of Americans believe that God in some way created the world. To believe that God made the world is not a faith. In Chassidus, and I learned just recently my brother, Derech Mitzvah, the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek explains beautifully. To believe that God created the world is not an act of faith. That's obvious. Just look around the world. Where else would the world have come from? There's so many proofs, intelligent design, and I'm not here to explain all the proofs that God is the logical answer for how the world came to be. Not only is it logical that God created the world, it's logical to understand that God is the life of the world. There's a very famous example given. It says, I think in the Gemara, that just like we see how our soul gives life to our body, so too we can see how God gives life to the world. Simple analogy, simple comparison. Just like our body is inherently, our body is dead. Our body is inanimate. Our body is lifeless. I mean, we know that. We've all seen dead people. And we know that a body without, many of us have seen dead people anyway. We know that a body without a soul, it's dead. It's lifeless. The life is what gives, the soul, is what gives life and animates the body. So when you see a body moving and talking, etc., you know it's not the body talking. There's a soul inside the body making the body talk. So too, when you see trees are growing, and you see birds are chirping in the trees, and you see flowers are blooming, etc., if you have half a brain and you think for a few minutes, you'll understand the world on its own is not growing. There's a life force within the world that's making the world grow. Call it God, call it a higher power, call it nature, call it what you want to call it, but you have to acknowledge that there's some life force that's animating and giving life to the world. So for a Jew to say, I believe in God, and that means I believe that God is giving life to the world, that's not emunah. That's not real faith. That's logical comprehension. Emunah, true faith, is something that is transcendent. True faith is something that literally is beyond human comprehension. Any level that we can comprehend of God's greatness is not emunah. The moment you can comprehend it, it's not faith. It's intellectual. Faith is beyond the limitations of the human mind. Faith is a transcendent experience that allows us to go beyond what the brain can comprehend, beyond what the person can intellectually appreciate or spiritually achieve, and to recognize something beyond what he can understand. That is faith. So in Kabbalah, it talks about the idea of in unholiness, in the forces of Klippa, of unholy forces, that God is called Elokah de Elokai. What does Elokah de Elokai mean? God of gods. So there's people that accept that God is the God of other gods, which means, let me make it very simple, say very simple English. The Jews living in Egypt. They believe that God created the world, right? Do you think the Jews living in Egypt didn't believe that God created the world? Of course they did. They believe that God's in charge of the world. But they thought God is the creator. God is the original life force of the universe. But then God made Egyptians. And he made the Egyptians in charge of us. So God is the big guy in charge. But the guys under him is something called Pharaoh. And we are under Pharaoh. That's what the Jews in Egypt thought. That's what it means when it says in the Zohar that the Jews that left Egypt didn't believe in God. Of course they believed that there's a creator of the universe. But they didn't accept that the Raza de Mehmusa, the secret idea, the foundation of believing in God means understand that Hashem is the only force of the universe. When we say Shema Yisrael, hear, O Israel, Hashem is Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. The Lord is one. What does it mean the Lord is one? We don't believe in Trinity? What does it mean the Lord is one?
One. The only one.
The only one. So, do we think there's two gods? Of course there's only one God. Why is it so important for a Jew to declare that every single morning, every single night, God is one? So in Chassidus it explains, the idea that God is one is not that there's only one God. God is the only one force of existence in the universe. Nothing else exists outside of God. If you could say that there's a God, and then there's Egypt, even though you're acknowledging that God is greater than Egypt, you're saying there's something that's not part of God's oneness. There's something that's not part of the Echad, of the one of God. That is a lack of emunah. That's a lack of faith in God. That's not true belief. So the Jewish people were in Egypt. They knew God. They believed in the creator of the universe. They believed in the God of gods. They believed in the King of Kings. Comes along HaKadosh Baruch when he says, these Jews, they're young. They're immature children. They don't have the idea of faith in God. Let me give them a spiritual medicine to infuse their souls with the ability to truly believe in one God. One God means that everything that exists is part of that one God. There is nothing that exists outside of that one God. Nothing exists outside that one God.
So it is part that all the Jews, even though they are not religious, knowing anything that
It's
they
not-
got the holiday Pesach.
Well, that's a good question. No time for right now. But the point, let's say in practical English. Let's say in today's days, the Jew tells you, I believe in God. I even go to Shul on Yom Kippur. I even have a Pesach Seder. But although God is in charge of the world, I also believe in other gods that are under that God. So God is the God of all gods, but I have other gods. Stock market, my doctor, sports hero, medicine. What? It's not your God. It's someone else's God.
No, I was.
I know people that to them the stock market is their God. And not because they deny God. They're not denying that God is King of all kings. He's in charge, and he made a stock market, and my livelihood is directly coming not from God, but it's coming from the stock market. Or it's coming from the client, or it's coming from whatever. And so we create other gods besides for the original source of the universe, God. That's lacking faith. That's lacking emunah in one Hashem, in Hashem Echad. Comes HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's what the Zohar is telling us, as Jews need a spiritual medicine. You have medicine for your kidneys, medicine for your blood pressure, medicine for your, I don't know for what, for your mental health, for your emotional health, right? Yeah. There's also medicine for your soul. The Jews need medicine for their neshama. What's the medicine? What's the vitamins for their soul? The Shmurah Matzah. This is what the Zohar is telling us. That when God gave us His medicine, it healed our souls. It gave us the ability to truly believe in one God. Now, why matzah? Maybe it should have been the mar. Maybe the korban pesach. Maybe wine. Next, we'll talk about wine. Why matzah? Why is the medicine that God said we need to eat in order to become infused with divinity and an appreciation for what it means to believe in God? Why matzah? You with me so far? Let's make sure we're all on the same page. The Jewish people are leaving Egypt. They're lacking emunah. They're like little children. And God says, let me heal them. Let me give them medicine. No chametz allowed in the house, because if you eat the chametz, you're not going to be infused with the spiritual vitamins of matzah. After you eat matzah and you become spiritually aware and cognizant of the oneness of God, and you're able to experience true faith, which means you can transcend the limitations of the human mind and connect to God in a way that's beyond your comprehension. So why are Jews willing to give their life for God, by the way? Jews have a feeling of connection to God that's illogical, including the non-religious Jews. You see many Jews that don't go to shul ever. They do nothing Jewish, and yet they feel so strongly proud of their Jewishness. The root of that is a connection to God that transcends logic. The matzah feeds that faith. It feeds that emotion. So now what I want to understand, the question that we need to understand now, is why is physical matzah that ingredient? If anything, you would think that what would be the spiritual medicine for the spiritual sickness of not believing in God? Meditate. Do something spiritual. Pray. Learn. How do you heal a spiritual illness? You would think spiritually, right? Why is physical matzah, flour and water, why is flour and water the medicine of our soul? So in Chassidus, you understand the question? It's a good question. So in Chassidus, it quotes the Gemara. Statement in the Talmud. Now this is an amazing statement. I might blow some people away over here who didn't know this. Many people, if you ask someone, let's change conversations completely, forget the story of the Exodus of Egypt, what's probably the next most famous story in all of the Bible, besides the story of the 10 plagues and the killing of the firstborn? No, more famous than the splitting of the Red Sea? No. Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Right? We're going backwards. Adam and Eve in the garden. I told you we're going to change conversation completely, but just for 1 second. Adam and Eve are sitting in the Garden of Eden. And God says, here is a tree. You cannot eat from it. What is the tree called? Tree of knowledge. The Eitz Hadas. Tov Hara, the tree of knowledge. What was the tree of knowledge? What kind of fruit was the tree of knowledge? So Kareen is saying, instantly, apple. You have a good teacher. Know who your teacher was? Oh, I forgot her name. No, the one that made the movie. I forgot. It's not a Jewish person anyway. The source of the apple is from who made the very, very famous movie? A picture. No. I think it originated from Michelangelo that they had a picture of an apple tree in the orchard, but then there's a very famous Hanna-Barbera, whatever. That's ecstasy. Yeah, so the idea that the apple tree was in the Garden of Eden has no Jewish source whatsoever. That's what I said. That's why you come to class. So it was not an apple tree. That's what it was not.
Was it a fig tree?
What was it? Yes. Okay. So the Gemara gives three opinions. One opinion is like Vivi said. The first opinion is the opinion that it was a grape, a vine. And therefore he would have made it, because it says a vine puts him to deep slumber, and after he ate from the tree, he fell into deep sleep and whatever. And that's also the day of making kiddush. Zoyar is also a grape, so you should take the grape, make it into wine, and make kiddush. That's one opinion. The second opinion, the Gemara says, Robert said correctly, a fig. Why a fig tree? Because when Adam was naked and he was embarrassed, and he took from the leaves of the fig tree to cover himself. So the one that made the mess should clean up the mess. So he was next to the fig tree and he ate from it. So he took the fig leaves and covered his body with a fig leaf. And the third opinion in the Gemara is not a date tree, not a pomegranate. If you want to cheat and look on the page that I gave you, you can cheat. The Gemara in Brachas, page 40, side A. Third opinion, the Gemara, what was the fruit of the tree of knowledge? Rabbi Yehuda says, Chita haisa. It was actually a wheat branch. The whole discussion is that a tree, why make ha'etz, not a adama. It was a chita. It was wheat. How do you know? Why does Yehuda say that the tree of knowledge was only wheat? And I was going to look like that doesn't fit my idea of a beautiful apple tree. Now we're talking about wheat. Why wheat? Says Rabbi Yehuda. She'ein hatina kedei alikres abba v'ima ad sheyitim tam dagan. Says Rabbi Yehuda, a child does not know how to say the word abba. Ima. You know what abba means? Of course. Father. Ima. Mama. A child, my wife is very excited. So Abba learned how to say mama. He also started eating food, by the way. Gabrielle actually gave him a formula or whatever. See? So a child, it's exactly what happened in my house just like a week ago. A child does not know how to say Abba v'ima until they eat wheat. Meaning, that's what the Gemara says, a child's maturity, they don't reach a level of the maturity to be able to say father, mother, until they eat wheat. Only after they eat wheat, then they have the knowledge, the das, to say father. Hence, what was the tree of knowledge? Wheat. Because wheat gives a person das. I'll ask you a simple question. You ready for a simple question? When the child says Abba, or let's say in the case of Safta, when a child says grandma, right? Do they understand what it is that makes this person their father or their mother? No. A 1-year-old child or a 10-month-old child that says mama, they don't understand why this person is their mother, what this person sacrificed to be the mother, what this person gives to be the mother, what this person's obligations or responsibilities are because they're their mother. But the child, when they say the word Abba, or they say the word Ima, they are describing exactly the essence of who is their father, who is their mother. They're saying something, they don't know what they're saying. But yet the feeling of connection that a child has, the feeling of bonding, of a knowledge and an awareness, das is an expression of connection, of not just intellectually know an idea. To intellectually know an idea is chachma. To be able to explain an idea and pontificate an idea and theorize an idea is bina. But to feel connected to an idea, to feel an emotional attachment to something that I know, that's das, that's knowledge. The child who has no comprehension of what it means to be a father, to be a mother, knows this is my father, this is my mother. This is true with a child on the simple level that only after they eat wheat, they have the ability to have hiskashrus, to have a connection of knowledge that this is my mother, and to say ima, or to say mama, and now they feel connected. So too, on the greater spiritual level, the Jewish people, when we left Egypt, we were like little babies. We didn't know how to look to our Father in heaven and say, Abba, Avinu Shebashamayim. And then when we ate the wheat of the matzah, that's what gave the Jewish people the ability to have a connection to God, to understand God in an emotional way, in the way that we feel connected to God, where we feel one with God, where we can feel this is my God. This is my father, this is my mother, this is the person taking care of me. That is what happened with the matzah. Understand? So why are we eating matzah? Why are we eating matzah today? You could say that the reason why we're eating matzah is because many, many years ago, 3,335 years ago to be exact, our forefathers sat down in Egypt and they had a Pesach Seder. And we want to remember the story. We want to remember the culture. We want to remember the history. So we're eating matzah to remember what happened so many years ago. You could say that. And technically it would be accurate. But that's not correct. That's not the reason why we eat matzah. Comes along the Haggadah tells us, matzah zu sha'anu eichlin. This matzah that we are eating, why are we eating it? Because the dough of our forefathers did not have a chance to rise. The dough that they ate not before midnight, when we eat our matzah before midnight. The dough that our forefathers ate after midnight, after God revealed himself, became so divinely infused that the dough didn't become chametz then. And that dough, that matzah, became our bread of faith. That matzah became the vitamin aleph, if you will, became the vitamins of our soul to allow our soul to internalize an understanding of God that is way beyond anything our brains could comprehend. That's what it means to have emunah. That's what it means to feel so connected to God. They don't just say, yeah, God created the world, but God left me under the authority of a mini-God or a semi-God or a partial God. Emunah means that I understand that I'm connected to God beyond what I can understand. And I recognize the world is not a world that's nullified to God. It's not what's called bittul hayesh. There's a world that's nullified to God. Not like my body that lives, the soul gives life to my body, but my body was created independent of my soul, but my body and will live after my soul. They live separately. The world does not exist outside of God. I don't exist outside of God. My whole life is God. That feeling for a Jew to feel that kind of connection to God, that's what we get through eating matzah on Pesach. Understand? This is why it's so important to eat the Shmurah matzah. Because this is, even though it's true every single day of the year, but Pesach is the time when the Jewish people were born as a nation. Pesach is the time when we became who we are as a nation. As a people. Who are we as a people? We're not just cultural Jews who have a history of Jews. We as a people are ma'aminim, b'nei ma'aminim. We are inherently believers, sons of believers. Our identity as a people is an identity of believers. Where do we get the ability to believe? What feeds and sustains and nourishes the Jews' ability to believe in a transcendent way beyond what our brains can comprehend? The Shmurah Matzah. And that's why tomorrow we're going to take so much time and effort and money to pack matzahs to make sure that every Jew in town has matzah. If anyone watching this doesn't have Shmurah Matzah, please come either here or whatever Chabad is nearby you and get Shmurah Matzah. Because when you eat that matzah, if you eat a machine matzah on Pesach, the effort of a human being making that matzah is gone. It may technically not be chametz, but the properties, the spiritual medical properties of infusing faith into the soul, a machine can't do that. That only a handmade matzah can do. Made lishma, made for the sake of the mitzvah, which also the discussion of a machine can be made when they turn on the switch, if it can be considered lishma. I'm not going to get into the halachic discussion, but the point is you need a real handmade matzah. Okay. Thank you, Art. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed. I have a beautiful story for you about matzah and emunah, and I'll take your questions. Actually, I have two stories, but I'm going to say one. One I know I said a few years ago, and tonight I watched again. I was looking for the details. I watched every tune and share the story. Beautiful story about the matzah and the faith that the matzah can have. So the Rebbe, every year, right before Pesach, would distribute himself personally handmade matzah to certain select people. It wasn't like a mass, but certain people got matzah, certain people got matzah, people who were traveling got matzah. There was a yeshiva student at the time, let's go back to like the 70s. There was a yeshiva student in New York at the time, his name was Shlomo Kunin. Today, Rabbi Shlomo Kunin, he should live and be well, is the head shliach in California. He has open baruch like 300, 400 Chabad houses in California. Then we go back to the 70s. He was a young yeshiva student, 20 years old. I don't know how old he was. And his family lived in the Bronx. That's where he grew up, in the Bronx. Grew up in the Bronx. So he came in the morning, 7:70. He was in the morning. And then he was getting ready to go back home for the Seder. He was going to be, spend Pesach with his family in the Bronx. He gets a message from Rabbi Goldner or whoever it was, Rabbi Chadakov. The Rebbe wants to know if he can deliver matzah to someone in the Bronx. Imagine the Rebbe comes, you get a message, the Rebbe wants to deliver matzah to someone. Absolutely. Now this is before you had Google Maps and before you had Waze and the good old days where you actually look at street signs to try and figure out where you're going. So he got an address somewhere in the Bronx. He had no idea where it was. He didn't recognize the address. He lived in the Bronx. He didn't know where it was. He gets into the subway. That's how he got from the Bronx. He didn't have a car. He gets to the subway. Trying to stop. He gets out. He's walking around. He didn't have a map either. It wasn't such an organized, I don't know if he ever used the map. Whatever. He's going. He's looking. He's trying to find directions, asking people. And it's taking him several hours to find this location. In the meantime, soon it's going to be dark. He's far away from his house. His family is expecting him to come home for the Seder. You know what I'm saying? That was the plan. He would be spend the Seder with his family. And here he's wandering around the streets of Bronx, trying to find his family that the Rebbe gave him matzah to distribute to this family. He has to give it to him. He's not going to go home and not deliver the matzah. Didn't even enter his mind to not deliver the matzah. So finally he finds a house where the matzah has to go. It's in one of the poorest sections of the Bronx, like in a real bad neighborhood. But even, a little kind of development, one of these buildings, like full of what are they called? The tenement buildings. Thank you. The guy goes where I was looking for, comes to this tenement building, comes to the whatever floor, finds the apartment number, he knocks on the door, opens the door, this massive guy wearing a sleeveless undershirt, tattoos on his arms, no kippah, like a real, a tough looking guy you don't mess with, a massive guy filled the door, all full of tattoos, opens the door, what do you want? He growls at him. He got really scared, maybe I got the wrong door, this does not look like the home where the Rebbe will be sending matzah. This guy, it's already dark outside. It's Pesach here with and then he sees on the table there's chametz, there's bread and everything. So the Rebbe sent with matzah. I don't know if I have the wrong house. Oh, the Rebbe sent you? Come in. He comes in. This big, massive guy, looked like double his size. He comes. He sees his chametz on the table. He sees his bread on the table. Pesach night. He realized that just delivering the matzah is not going to do what the Rebbe wanted him to do. This person obviously did not know how to make a seder. There was no seder table. There was no tablecloth, no wine, no haggadah, no nothing. So he said to himself quickly, what would the Rebbe want me to do? Just deliver the matzah and leave, like a UPS postal service? Or help them eat the matzah? They should. So in that moment of decision, he's not going home to a seder. He's going to have a seder with this interesting family in the Bronx. So he says to the guy, maybe you have a tablecloth or something we can put on the table and get rid of the bread. It's Pesach, So he didn't have a table. He found some kind of white cloth, put over the table. He took the chametz away. They cleared the table off, put the matzah down. He said, Pesach, let's do a seder. They had no wine in the house. They took the cups of water. They said, remember the 4 cups. And his wife comes out from the other room. She's obviously very late in her pregnancy. And she has with her 2 kids, 2 young kids. Both are blind. 2 blind children in this house. And he starts the whole seder. He launches into this, the kiddush, and he makes kiddush in a cup of water. And they talk about Exodus. And they talk about, there was no seder plate. There was no shenkpon. There was no egg. There was no nothing. But he gives them the whole story. He speaks to this couple, this family, about the days of Exodus, the days of Egypt, the day of leaving Egypt, remembering the matzah and the maror. And then finally eat the matzah. They celebrate the Pesach Seder to the best he could under the circumstances. Finally, it's 10 o'clock at night. 10 o'clock at night, he thinks it's probably time for me to go home. And my family's probably getting worried about me by now. Again, no cell phones back then. His family had no idea where he is. So probably should go home. So before I leave, how do you know the Rebbe? The Rebbe said matzah to this family. So he says to him as follows. This is what this guy says to Shlomo Kuhn. He says, I work in a tannery, in a meat tannery. A tannery where they take skins of an animal, no slaughterhouse. And so I tan. It looks like a guy that works in a meat factory. And I have 2 children. Both are born with a genetic illness that makes them blind from birth. My wife is pregnant, and the doctor does some testing, and our third child is also going to be born blind with the same genetic illness, and the doctors have been pushing us very strongly to abort the child. The child will abort all these genetic illnesses, and we should abort the child. I didn't know what to do. We don't want to abort the child, but the doctors are pressuring us, and we're feeling like we have to listen and abort the child, so it shouldn't be born with all the illnesses and all the suffering and medical problems that other two children have. So I'm very depressed. I come to work, and one of the rabbis that work in the factory is a sheikh, the slaughterer. He's a Chabad rabbi, a Chabad chassid. He sees that I'm very depressed. So I asked him what's the problem. I told him the whole story that my child will be born with all the genetic illnesses, and the doctor wants us to abort the child. So he convinced me to write a letter to the Rebbe. I never met the Rebbe in my life. But I decided to write a letter to the Rebbe. So I wrote a letter to the Rebbe describing the situation, that my wife is pregnant and the doctor wants to abort. And the Rebbe sent me back a beautiful letter with a blessing not to abort the child, and that everything will be okay. That was a blessing I got from the Rebbe. And then a week or two later, you show up here with me. The Rebbe got the letter. He saw the address. So besides for sending back a blessing, the Rebbe also sent a yeshiva student, Rabbi Kunin, to bring this family who knew nothing about Judaism. They were eating bread on the night of Seder. To bring them matzah and to give them a Pesach experience. Yeah, of course they were Jewish. Of course, you think it's a matzah? Yeah, of course they were Jewish. Jewish family were completely disconnected. Completely disconnected. That's how much the Rebbe cared that a Jew should have matzah on Pesach. He sent Rabbi Kunin to go to this family to spend the Seder there. They should have matzah. Anyway, a few weeks later, or a month later, a boy was born, perfectly able to see, not blind. They had a bris. Other children were saying, Rabbi Kunin arranged to have a bris. And then he lost touch with the family a little bit. He heard years later that the child got married, and all the children got married. They had children, and give you an idea of the power of matzah and the power of taking a Jew who seemingly is so distant and his faith is so weak, and to be able to infuse an injection of emunah, of true belief in God that transcends the doctors, transcends medicine, transcends science, transcends money, transcends bank accounts, transcends everything. The one God, the only God, that is the existence of the universe, Hashem Echad, that is what we get through eating matzah. And I hope I've explained the idea of why matzah is important, and why if you know someone that doesn't have matzah, make sure that they have matzah, because just the eating of the matzah, just when you eat food, and food has the ability to give you energy. I'm not getting into that whole discussion tonight about eating bread and the life, the God, divine force in the bread. When you eat matzah, it gives you an infusion of faith for our souls. Okay, my friends, that's the story of the matzah. And God willing, next week we'll talk about the wine. Matzah represents the emunah of a Jew, the faith of a Jew. Next week, same time, same place, God willing, we'll talk about what wine means in our service of God. Okay? Laila Tov.